Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 185. The key is, don't monkey around with the script. Then everything usually goes pretty well. Steven Soderbergh.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my Indie Film Hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is sponsored by Video Blocks. Now, guys, when I was shooting my show for Legendary Pictures, and I did that 96 pages in 4 days, I actually got into post and we used a lot of stock footage, stock sounds, and even some graphics from Video Blocks. They are an amazing resource. With your membership, you are granted the rights to use that footage forever, in perpetuity, on any projects you want to. So if you want to try a 7-day free trial, and by the way, anything you download during those 7 days is yours to keep. And if you decide to stay, you get 84% off the yearly membership. It is well worth it, guys. Trust me, if you do a lot of production, it is something you really need. So just head over to videoblocks.com/hustle. And today's show is also sponsored by Masterclass and Martin Scorsese's Masterclass, if you can believe it. Marty is teaching you how to direct films in his amazing new masterclass. I signed up instantly and I cannot wait for it to come out. To pre-enroll to get early access, just head over to indiefilmhustle.com/Scorsese. That's indiefilmhustle.com/SCORSESE. So today on the show, guys, we've got screenwriter Scott Meyers, who has been writing in Hollywood as a professional screenwriter for better part of 30 years now. And he wrote one of my favorite movies growing up called K-9 with James Belushi back in '89, but has written many other things and worked on multiple projects over the years. But even more impressive to me is that he runs gointothestory.com, which is an insane treasure trove of screenwriting information, resources, and the man is crazier than I am, because you guys know I put out a lot of content on Indie Film Hustle. This man has been putting out daily posts for, I think now, like 10 years or something like that. It's insane. He literally puts out new posts, new resources, new articles every single day. He is a maniac and a machine, and I love him for it. And also, he is the official screenwriting blog for The Blacklist. And if you guys don't know what The Blacklist is, you will after this interview is over. And it's pretty amazing what The Blacklist has done for screenwriters and for Hollywood in general. But I wanted to get Scott on because he is an educator. He loves teaching and loves sharing his craft and his knowledge about what it really is like in the film business. And I just wanted to get some real raw knowledge bombs thrown on you guys about screenwriting. So without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Scott Meyers. I'd like to welcome to the show Scott Meyers. Man, thank you so much for being on the show.
Great to be here, Alex.
I appreciate it, man. So how did you get into this crazy business we call the film industry?
I had a circuitous route. I was going to be an academic. I went to UVA undergraduate and Yale graduate school and got a master's of divinity degree at Yale. I was going to become a PhD and teach, but my parents at the age of 14 ill-advisedly bought me a guitar. And I started playing music. And by the time I got done with Yale, I talked to my friends and the dean, and I said, if I don't pursue this creative thing and just become an academic, I think I'm going to really regret it. So they said, take a year off, and that became the rest of my life. I played music for 7 years. I did stand-up comedy for 2 years. Along the way, I discovered screenwriting. I wrote a script called K-9. That sold as a spec script in 1987 to Universal, and that's where it all started.
Wow, and you've never looked back since?
Well, I've had various incarnations. I was in LA for 15 years, wrote 30 projects for every major studio and every broadcast network except for ABC. With my family, we decided for family reasons to move back east where I was from. And I took a position as a television producer, basically heading up the creative development part of the company for Trailblazer Studios, and then I started teaching as a side thing because people kept saying every time I do presentations, "Hey, you're really good at this." Started teaching adjunct through University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, where we were living, and also UCLA Extension or the Writers Program, and then I started my own online company with Tom Benedict, who wrote Cocoon. It was the first screenwriter I met in LA. I called Screenwriting Masterclass, so I continue to do that. But now I'm in Chicago at the School of Cinematic Arts at DePaul University and full-time faculty here. And so I've transitioned into teaching. I still write, and I'm still, because of my blog and whatnot, actively involved in things in Hollywood and the entertainment business. But just wearing a number of hats along the way.
And eating a lot of great pizza in Chicago, I'm assuming.
Yeah, pizza and everything else.
It's so good, man. The food there is amazing.
Yeah, it really is amazing.
So, one of my favorite films, one of my favorite films from the video store days when I worked at a video store was K-9. And I want you to discuss a little bit about how that script was made and what it did for your career. Well, I had one of those odd circumstances in life. I'm a big Joseph Campbell fan. I discovered him in college and studied him there at the University of Virginia, and then later on at Yale, and have read a bunch of his stuff over the years. And this idea about follow your bliss, find that which excites you and enlivens you, that you have talent for, and pursue that. And I'd always been a movie fan. My dad was in the Air Force. We moved around all over the place. When you're living in Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota, and there's nothing to do, and you can go spend 50 cents at the movie theater and watch movies all day long, that's what I did. So I was a huge movie fan. And as it happened one night, I was doing stand-up comedy in a club in Ventura, California. I'd gotten to know the owner, one of the owners there, and he was going to the USC Peter Stark producing program. And the script that he had that he was going to use for his master's thesis had dropped out. It actually got optioned. And it just happened that day. And we were talking that night, and he said, "Well, I need a script." And he jokingly said to me, "Can you write a screenplay?" And I said, "I can do that." Which has always been my attitude about creative things that I connect with. And I didn't know anything. He gave me 3 scripts: Witness, Back to the Future, and Breaking Away. And Sid Field's book, Screenplay Foundations of Screenwriting. And so I wrote a script, and then I wrote another one, and then we wrote one together called K-9, and that's based on actually a story we heard about a Ventura policeman, a canine policeman, who had a police dog partner who had been killed in the line of duty. And we met with this guy, and he was just like weeping as he was showing us pictures of this. And we thought, well, that's an interesting idea for a movie. And we wrote the script, and as I say, it's sold to Universal, actually a preemptive buy for quite a bit of money. And that's where it all started. We didn't have a representation. Wow, really? You didn't have any reps at the time? You just were able to – how did Universal find you?
My partner was working as an assistant at 20th Century Fox, and slipped the script in there, and it went in for the weekend read, and Scott Rudin was the head of production, and evidently I've heard this from several people, at the end of all these scripts he didn't like, he slapped his hand on the table and said, "I love this one." And it wound its way around town. That night, I didn't have an agent that day. That night I met Dan Halstead, Steve and I, my partner, and Dan was just a junior agent at Bauer Benedict, which later became UTA. Dan's got his own management company called Management, but he was our first agent along with Peter Benedict and Marty Bauer. And so that's how it started. And then we just ran and took a lot of meetings, and off we went.
Now, there was another dog cop movie around that time. Is there any connection?
Yeah, Turner and Hooch at Disney. We were flavors of the week. We went around and met everybody, including an executive at Disney who said, "Hey, we were thinking about suing you guys." And we had no idea what he was talking about. But there was this project, Turner and Hooch, which was sitting in development hell there. And, very typical. I learned a good lesson in Hollywood, how they operate this similar but different, which is the business ethos. They're so afraid to make anything that they look for something that's similar to something that, was successful. Well, we went around and people were telling us, "God, you guys were genius, man. Rin Tin Tin was the biggest star in the history of Hollywood, and here you resurrect him." I hadn't thought about that at all, but I just nod my head and go, yeah, that's right. Yeah, sure. So they looked at our script. Disney looked at our script that sold for a lot of money, and they said, well, hey, if Universal thinks that a cop and a dog movie, a comedy, is a good idea, we should resurrect this thing, Turner and Hooch.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Which they did, and so there was this little competition between the two films, which would come out first, and ours did, and both movies, did well. K-9 spawned 2 sequels, and Turner and Hooch did very good business as well.
Yes, they were both. I used to recommend both of them at the video store. If one rented one, I'm like, you got to watch K-9 as well, or the vice versa.
Then I probably made, I don't know, 25 cents in residuals. So thanks, Alex.
Not any time, sir. Anytime. I'm sure. Well, I watched that movie a ton of times when I love that movie. I love James Belushi. He was in the top of his power back then, during that time of his career. So, thank you for making the movie, sir.
Yeah, it got made, and you can't say that about a lot of projects in Hollywood.
I mean, seriously. And I remember that hit the theater. It was a theatrical release, and it made, if I remember, it did very well. Both of them did very well for the time. That's when Hollywood was making, $8 million movies, $10 million movies. Yeah,
they don't do that. They don't do that much anymore. The middle area is dropped out. They do those big budget franchise things and the lower budget things, but it's up to the financiers and other production companies make those $10 million and up movies.
Exactly. Now, how much research do you do when you're writing a script?
Well, for example, with K-9, I actually spent time with the Ventura K-9 police. Mm-hmm. Then once the project got set up, went on some ride-alongs with some of the LAPD. Mm-hmm. I did a lot of research. So yeah, I do a lot of research. Do
you suggest that screenwriters, when they're writing something, to do as much research as humanly possible?
Yes, up to a point. It can become an excuse not to write. I can't tell you how many times I've when I was living in LA. Of course, you see screenwriters all the time, and aspiring screenwriters as well. And you say, "Hey, how you doing? Oh, yeah, I'm working on this great project. It's World War II thing, set in Korea. Oh, great. See him 6 months later. How you doing? Yeah, I'm researching this project in World War II in Korea. Well, when are you going to start writing? I do think it's important to do research. Be smart about it. But you can get a lot of anecdotes, a lot of character development, a lot of inspirational things that can inspire scenes and whatnot. You need to hit that mark. That big 25-cent word. The script has to have a sense of verisimilitude. It's got to feel real. It's not a documentary, mm-hmm. but it's got to come across as authentic. You have to gain the confidence of the reader that you know what you're talking about. So to the degree that you have to do the research to get to that point, then research is important.
But yeah, and if you walk into any Starbucks here in LA, you cannot see a laptop without Final Draft on it.
When I left LA, I flew back there for a TV production thing that we were doing, mm-hmm. and I came in really late at night, and I was walking up the courtyard to my hotel room, and I saw this, the light of a computer shining on some guy's face alone out there in the courtyard, and I said, I guarantee this guy's got Final Draft open. I just know it. Mm-hmm. And I walked past, and sure enough, it's like you can't escape it. It's like everywhere.
When I got here almost 10 years ago, I was shocked that there's not one Coffee Bean, not one Starbucks anywhere in Los Angeles at any time. There is someone writing a script.
And, that can be both debilitating emotionally, because you realize, oh my gosh, everybody's like out there trying to do this or doing it. Mm-hmm. But it can also be inspiring in a wicked sort of way, in that you realize that when you're not writing, someone else is. Mm-hmm. And so that can put that sort of negative reinforcement to get your butt in the chair to actually write.
Yeah, writing is screenwriting is an extremely competitive sport, especially here in Hollywood.
Yes, it's extremely competitive. Yeah.
Now, can you talk a little bit about the blacklist?
Yes, the blacklist is, to me, and I think this would probably not be countered by many people, it's the most significant screenwriting brand in Hollywood. And I don't say this because my blog, Going to the Story, is the official screenwriting blog of the Blacklist, mm-hmm. Though I I love those people, and Franklin Leonard is a friend, and I've followed what they've done for years. But, Franklin started this like 12 years ago when he was an exec at Universal, and just sent around notes to people, emails to friends, and going away for, that December break that everybody does for about a month, saying, hey, can you recommend some of the best scripts that are out there right now that are not being produced? Mm-hmm. And he simply got their feedback, totaled up the numbers, created a PDF, and sent it out. And it became like this thing. It's evolved now to the point where in December, it's basically, I think, the second Monday in December, they come out with the annual blacklist. That's a big deal. Mm-hmm. For that 2 to 3 hour period of time, the entire development community in Hollywood is focused on what makes the blacklist. That I've interviewed dozens of blacklist screenwriters. Mm-hmm. If their script makes the blacklist, if you're not represented, you can get represented. Most of the scripts are, with writers who were represented. Mm-hmm. If the project has been sitting and not moving forward, well, oftentimes it gets it moved forward. There's talent now that will only read material if it's on the blacklist. For example, The Imitation Game. Mm-hmm. Benedict Cumberbatch read that script because it was a top blacklist script. I've read several actors who talk about how that essentially it's an imprimatur. The blacklist is a good housekeeping seal of approval that the community, the development community, is saying this is a script, worthy of your attention. So the blacklist is an important brand for screenwriters in Hollywood, and I can tell you that every writer that I've interviewed who's made the blacklist, it's been a big boost to their career, as well as helping to get movies made.
And a lot of the scripts are on the blacklist. Sometimes are, from what I've known and from what I've read over the years, it's like some scripts are just, they're not producible. Sometimes they're so good or they're so out there that they're wonderful scripts, but Hollywood would just not take the chance on them. Does that happen often too?
I don't know. Often, I mean, it's just getting anything made is extremely hard in Hollywood, even if it comes with the kudos from the blacklist. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there have been certain projects, like there was a project about a comedy about Ronald Reagan being president, who was suffering from essentially early dementia, mm-hmm. and that looked like that was going to go forward, but then some people thought that was insensitive or whatnot, so that got pulled. Ironically, some of the more bizarre scripts, I think the blacklist helps. For example, there was the script the one about Michael Jackson's Monkey.
Yes, I heard about that one.
Yeah, Isaac Adamson, I think, wrote that up in Portland, and it's getting made as a stop motion picture,
mm-hmm.
action, whatever you call that technology, mm-hmm. with Dan Harmon as an executive producer. So. Bubbles was the name of the script. That was the name of Michael Jackson's chip. It's like literally told from the perspective of Bubbles during a crucial year in Michael Jackson's life. So
that's genius. It's actually a quite genius concept.
Oh, it's fantastic. Of course, Isaac said there was no way that he thought anything would happen with it. He just thought it was a funny idea. But there you go. It's
kind of like what Charlie Kaufman does with his scripts, like, being John Malkovich, who in the right mind thought that would ever get made.
Right. Yeah.
But it was genius. It was absolutely a brilliant script. Can you talk a little bit about, from your perspective, your feeling on the way Hollywood is going today and how it's so dramatically changed from the days of K-9 to the days of today? And obviously a lot of big problems are happening at the box office this year. It's one of the worst box offices in decades, if I'm not mistaken. I know this Labor Day coming up, they said that this is going to be the worst Labor Day weekend in 25 years. So I want to hear your perspective on that, if you can.
Well, it has changed considerably. So the underlying ethos of similar but different that we talked about earlier, that I think is still pretty much in place. In fact, in some respects,
worse.
It's almost like it's almost worse in that they're looking for things that are more similar than more different, because that fear factor. The main changes, some of them for the positive. The digital technologies, which in some respects, at least if you're a filmmaker, is a major boon, because you don't need to buy film stock. You can literally go out with a digital camera or even your iPhone. We saw that with Tangerine, that movie, where you can go out and make a movie for next to nothing. These micro budget films.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Edward Burns makes and whatnot that, for $25,000 or even less, you can do that nowadays. On the other hand, because of digital technology, you've got the CGI phenomenon so that, you can make these incredible spectacle movies. Unfortunately, that has tended to suck the air out of what used to be a mainstay of Hollywood filmmaking, which was mid-budget dramas, mid-budget action thrillers and whatnot. And so the studios, for whatever reason, I think they have some numbers to bear this out, though that may be changing with this summer because so many of the franchise movies have underperformed at the box office. They put their money into these franchise films. I have this, you've heard that theory of the 4-quadrant film, which is adult, child, male, female. Well, my theory is that there's a new 4-quadrant theory: franchise, franchise, spectacle, nostalgia, and international. Those 4 things are really driving the marketplace right now. And so you've got this bifurcated approach that the major studios have, which is expensive $150, $200 million, $250 million franchise movies, and then lower budget genre type things. In the middle, whatever is left of the middle, is really being handled by these financiers and production companies. There's probably still as many movies being made, maybe not as many necessarily as back in the 80s, but the major studios are not making anywhere. Disney used to make like 35, 40 films a year.
Yeah, exactly.
Now they make, maybe 15. So
that's a lot. And that's a lot. And they're probably the leader. I don't think, because a lot of the big studios are like Paramount, for God's sakes. They make like 2, 3, 4, big movies a year. So it's changed dramatically.
Yeah, well, and it changes with each regime. Like Warner Brothers for many years, like I track spec scripts deals. I've been tracking them since 1991. On my blog, I've got a database of over 2,000 spec script deals since 1991. Warner Brothers.
You're a crazy man.
Well, I just, I started doing it because that's when you're a screenwriter, you got to know what's selling, and you got to, if only to cover your ass, to say, oh, well, that project sold. That was just like what I've got, so I can't be doing that anymore. But just to also follow the trends. If you're looking at like what's in the movie theaters right now as being an example of what the buyers are buying, you're 2 to 5 years behind the trends. You follow the spec script deals now in order to find out what the development community is interested in. Anyhow, so I don't know where I was going with that. I lost my train of thought, but
how crazy. The mid-range things are gone.
Yeah, the mid-range. These financiers, these so-called financiers, many of them sons and daughters of billionaires like Megan Ellison and David Ellison, Annapurna Productions. They will step in and they'll make some of these movies, that we would typically see in the past, the studios would have been doing, but the studios aren't. But we'll see. It'll be interesting. I'm not sure whether, maybe there's a bit of franchise fatigue. And the idea that they can just throw spectacle on the screen. By the way, Aristotle, that was the least important thing in his list of things in poetic. Spectacle was at the very bottom.
Right.
And it's like, you have all this stuff on the screen. If there's no emotional resonance with the characters, what does it mean? Well, that has tended to play out okay. Some of these movies that have done poorly domestically have done okay internationally, which now is basically 70% of box office revenues. But, they're getting more savvy about this. They're saying, hey, wait a minute, we want a good story too. So I'm not so sure that we might see a little bit of a retrenchment where they start to make a few more movies and lower budget movies, the major studios. But we'll see.
Look at a movie like Deadpool, which is an anomaly, but that is a big studio movie, but it was made for $40 million and did not. It was a complete against everything that the studios normally do. It's a R-rated movie. It was a second tier, a third tier character, and Ryan Reynolds is, he's a star, but he's not he wasn't a monster star either. That he's not a Tom Cruise or any of these kind of bigger stars that would justify a big big movie like that. So it was really wonderful to see a movie like that not only get made, but to shake up the industry, because it outperformed pretty much, I think, almost every comic book movie that year that came out.
Yeah, those writers, that took them 10 years.
Yeah.
To get the thing. Ryan Reynolds basically, kept not stringing them along, but supporting that project, because people were saying, well, who's going to go see an R-rated superhero movie that's basically kind of winking at the genre?
Right. And then the way they finally got it done is Ryan Reynolds leaked some footage onto the internet, and everyone went crazy.
Yeah. Similar thing with Arrival. Eric Heiser, I know, he would go around town when he was having all these meetings, and they'd say, well, what, after the end of the meeting, hey, what's your passion project? And he'd whip out the short story by Ted Chiang, Story of Your Life, and say, I'd like to do this. And they'd say, oh, great. Well, what is it? Well, it's about these aliens that, aliens. Oh, that's great. So, yeah. And so the hero, is like the big action thing. Well, no, not really. The hero's a woman, and she's a linguist. She's a what? She's a linguist. And so, but there's still a big action, blowing up. No, actually, the aliens just leave. It's a linguist who solves it. And they would just, nobody was going to make this movie until, some producers finally saw it. And now, you see it. It's a fantastic movie, and it's done really well. It always takes one person to say yes, one person who's got clout and passion for it.
Yeah. And
you just try to find, as a screenwriter, you try and find those people.
Yes. Because, on paper, that doesn't look, it doesn't fit in all the boxes that a studio would be looking for.
It's in like none of the boxes.
Not even one. Not even one.
Other than science fiction, but a female lead, drama,
a linguist. Yeah, I know. It's no action. What? It didn't make any sense. Do you ever think that Hollywood is going to come around to original ideas and really start focusing on them? Because they might be riskier, but these franchises that they keep bringing up, they're all from 80s, 90s, and even 2000s. And that's what they keep recycling. And they're even going deeper now into television and anything that's, but there's a certain point where they're going to run out. They're going to run out of, they're redoing Fantastic Four again. They're rebooting it again. Like, guys, just original. What do you think?
Look, if you talk to, most working screenwriters, yeah, we all say the same thing, which is we'd love to see more original movies made. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, again, it's a fear-based business. And right now, frankly, this nostalgia element is just huge.
Stranger Things and that kind of, yeah.
And so, like the perfect, what really drove this home to me was when I saw Jurassic World. Mm-hmm. You remember that the Spielberg gaze, when they look up and, right? In Jurassic Park, when you first saw that was when they saw the dinosaurs for the first time. Mm-hmm. In Jurassic World, when you first saw that, it's when they saw the park for the first time. So the Jurassic World was a wash in nostalgia about the movie Jurassic Park as exhibited in the actual park itself. Mm-hmm. So I think we see that right now, and that's a major driver. Frankly, even many blacklist scripts that do well have a nostalgic element. Last year, the top script was on Madonna. The year that she was, Blonde Ambition. She was going to break out that year. The year before that was Bubbles on Michael Jackson. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, a spec script sold that was called Jack and Dick, about the odd friendship between Jack Kennedy and Dick Nixon.
Really?
So that's, yeah. So you see a lot of these blacklist scripts, the dramas are historically based dramas that evoke something of our past. And so you can still do original movies, involving nostalgia. But this franchise type thing, yeah, that's just completely all about repeating the same thing. Look, I have a running bet with some writers. How soon will Warner Brothers reboot Harry Potter?
Yeah, I was wondering that myself. Like at a certain point, like when are they going to do it again?
If they continue to have problems, which they are, it just shrinks the time before you can. So they're going to do that.
But they did it with The Hobbit, which was just, oh God, like why? They did that basically as close to a reboot of Lord of the Rings as they could have made. But I was wondering, like, how long is it going to take? I'm like, can they do it? Like, it's Harry Potter. I mean, this is something that's never been done in the history of cinema.
We'll see. I look, it's an IP. They own it. It's, universally loved. They'll have another generation that will come up and.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
And have their version of Emma Watson and, all the rest. I wouldn't put Hollywood, they're driven by obviously trying to make money, but these things are all run in cycles. I remember I was a musician for many years and living in Aspen, Colorado, and which was great at the time because there were all these clubs where we could play, but then disco came along. And so a lot of these clubs turned into disco, and it was very depressing for, actual musicians because you wouldn't make as much, money that way. Mm-hmm. But then what came along? Punk music came along, and garage band, the Dire Straits came along with Sultans of Swing, and so that led in the whole Nirvana and all that stuff. So these things run in cycles, and it's the same thing with movies. Mm-hmm. There will always be filmmakers out there doing original content, and with the digital technologies, it's not that expensive to go out and do things like the Duplass Brothers and whatnot. Where you can just make these movies that are character based, and they'll find their mark. The Big Sick, perfect example. Did you see The Big Sick?
No, I have not seen it yet.
Movie.
I want to see
terrific. It's a terrific movie. It's got like a 98 rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and it's an original film, and it's just touching and human, and done great business, and so there's always a room for that type of thing.
Now, where agents and managers, how and when do you need to get one?
How and when? Well, obviously, it's of a benefit to get represented. You can't typically get material to producers and studios without being represented. Some people can have an entertainment lawyer and do it that way. How do you get a manager, basically, or an agent? First of all, I think my advice to people is you focus on managers. Managers are different breed than agents. Agents are, this is a real generalization, and it varies from agency to agency and management company to management company. Mm-hmm. But as it was explained to me once by a manager, he said agents wear suits and managers wear blue jeans, which is an interesting way to think about it. And agents are deal makers, largely. That's their primary thing. Mm-hmm. Managers are more about nurturing the careers of writers, and so they can spend a lot more time with writers, actually developing material and whatnot. Again, it varies from manager to manager. They're much more likely to be open to unsolicited material. Mm-hmm. Just email them, do it very briefly, like Seth Blockhead did. Mm-hmm. He wrote Hannah, and
what a great script. Oh,
he was in Vancouver, and he's just sent out an email to like 500 managers. New spec script, girl trained to be an assassin. Interested? And he got like 2 responses, and one of them became his manager, and then that led to Hannah. Well, you can be a lot more targeted on that. Whatever project you've got, go IMDb Pro, find 10 to 15 movies that are like yours in the same genre space. Mm-hmm. Identify the producers who are also managers. That's one of the reasons why agents become managers, because they can also be producers. Mm-hmm. And then find out their email addresses. Oftentimes you can find them online or through Done Deal Pro.
Twitter.
That's Twitter, whatever. Yeah. And then to do a very simple thing. Say, I've got a spec script like your movie. And then that's in your subject line. And then you go into your text and just very briefly, here's a log line. Are you interested? I've known a lot of people actually have gotten into the door that way. More traditional ways, you can go use the Nickel Fellowships in Screenwriting, which is the most prestigious of those contests. Mm-hmm. There are other ones, but that's the one that I've interviewed every Nickel winner since 2012. And so, again, like the Blacklist, that's one of those things that can change your life. You can get representation off and get a lot of work. The Blacklist has its website. By the way, I don't get paid by the Blacklist, so I'm not getting a kickback here. Mm-hmm. But that's been very successful. It's like real-time Hollywood. I think there are like over 3,000 members of the Hollywood development community that track it. It's probably their assistants who do this like on Monday morning and go through and just see what's up there. But you can from anywhere in the world upload a script there. Obviously, you have to pay money to have it hosted. You get it evaluated by their readers. But they've had, I think, 5 movies made off of scripts discovered off the Blacklist website at this point, 5. And they've had hundreds of people get representation that way. So there are, as difficult as it is and challenging as it is, and in some ways it's more competitive than ever, it's actually got more access to Hollywood, I think, nowadays than it used to be. It used to be you had to know someone who was sisters with someone, who slept with someone, who worked in the business to get your material to someone who could actually read it and do something about it. Nowadays, there are these conduits into the system, that don't require you to move to LA and become an assistant, though that's certainly an intelligent thing to do if you're young and have the wherewithal to do that. But in terms of getting a manager, that's one way of doing it, is literally you do your research, find some movies that were like your script, and then source those manager producers and just email them. And the best of all worlds, you'd have 3 scripts in the same genre and say, because that shows that you've got an approach, you've got passion, you're persistent, you've got 3 projects which they could potentially set up or try and get, writing assignments, for writing assignments, or even get them optioned or sold. But generally speaking, that's one way to do it.
Now, can you talk a little bit about what writing assignments are? Open writing assignments?
OWAs. That used to be a staple of the business. I mean, I did, of the 30 projects that I have done in Hollywood, when I was out there actually vying for open writing assignments. I don't do it now. I just write on spec, and if they like it, great. If not, then that used to be a staple of the business. I mean, I'd say that probably 20 to 22 of the projects I've written have been open writing assignments. The rest were pitches or specs that sold. An open writing assignment is what it sounds like. It's a project that's at a studio or a production company where they've either got a draft that was written by like a first writer and they feel that it needs some work, or a draft that's been rewritten by a bunch of writers, which is often the case. And they need someone to come in and fix it. In a very fundamental way, a screenwriter in Hollywood is a problem solver. And so executives and production executives will meet with you and say, look, we know the script has problems. We don't know how to fix it. So your job as a screenwriter is to identify the problems and then come in with suggestions. Here's how I would approach this and solving this. Here's the story I would tell. And, I'm reminded of the story of Forrest Gump, how because I had done some work with the producer who discovered the book, Wendy Feineman, and she told the story about how Tom Hanks, this is a passion project for Tom Hanks, and they'd had 3 A-list writers adapting that book and had not nailed it. And then they finally brought in Eric Roth, and Eric read the scripts and read the book, and he said, I think I know what the problem is. There's no love story. Jenny, I guess, is not that big of a deal in the book. But what Eric identified was a problem. There's no emotional through line for that project. So that's a perfect example of an open writing assignment where we came in and identify a problem. And then, can you imagine Forrest Gump without the Forrest-Jenny love story?
Well, of course not.
No. So It's just amazing that 3 A-list writers didn't identify that, but Eric did. So open writing assignments, the problem is that there's just fewer projects getting made now. So there's fewer open writing assignments. And that's why you see something interesting nowadays, that working screenwriters, these are people who are like maybe not A-list, but A- list or B-list screenwriters, will spec scripts, at least one a year. We'll write a spec script, at least one, maybe even 2 a year, even while they're actively involved in the business and getting work, because the open writing assignment arena, you chase those things. I know a writer who for a year chased open writing assignments, didn't land one thing, and just said, screw it. And then he spec'd something, and then, and that set up. So that didn't used to be the case. You would write a spec script and that was it. It was just to get you into the business. Nowadays, there are so few writing assignments available that market has shrunk, that you see a lot of working screenwriters who are continuing to write spec scripts. So
Now, do you find that a lot of screenwriters that normally did feature work are now going towards television and streaming platforms?
Yes, that's absolutely the case. And there's an upside and a downside to that.
Mm-hmm.
Some upsides are it's employment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. The downside of that is it's not as much money, and particularly these streaming services, the staffs are smaller, the time pressure, the budgets are less.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
So you're doing a lot more work in some respects for a lot less money than if you were writing a screenplay. That can vary from project to project, but it is employment, and it also offers writers an opportunity to do these 10 episode chunks, 8 episodes, 12, 13 episodes, these limited run series. They can just go in and knock out a mini, what we used to call a mini series, and they're done with it. It's like a long story. Or they can, do like Holly did with Fargo, and have a 3-season series, which means that he can go off and do the series and then go off and direct a movie too in the same year because it's only 10 episodes or whatnot. So that market has blown up. As they talk about the second golden age of TV or peak TV. Supposedly there are over 500 TV series on broadcast, basic cable, pay cable, and streaming right now. 500, which I think is like quadruple the amount that maybe there were like 10 years ago. Interesting thing is that there's again, it's just like this. There's so many things changing right now. On the one hand, you've got feature writers going over working in TV and bringing those feature sensibilities to TV. And in many respects, what we call TV now does feel like long movies and does have the cinematic quality of movies. On the other hand, we're seeing the flow of ideas from the TV side entering into the film side, where you've got these writers' rooms, working on Transformers at Paramount, or working on the horror movies at Universal, or working on DC Comics or Marvel. So there's this really interesting interplay. And frankly, I don't know that in 10 or 15 years, because people are actually watching Mad Max Fury Road on their iPhone, which of course I would think is insane.
It is.
But, young people, whatever, in 10 or 15 years, we may not call them movies. We may not call them TV. I mean, I ask my students at the beginning of every quarter, I say, so what are you watching? And they tell me what shows they're watching. I say, how many of you watch them on TV? And no one raises their hand. So why even call it TV if we're not even watching it on TV?
Yeah.
So
why call it film if you're not shooting on film?
Not shooting on film, if what is it about, the 2 hours? Maybe we're seeing a growth, by the way, of short films. These short film festivals are expanding, and short films is another way that you can break into Hollywood. Go out and make a 5 to 10 minute film, show your chops as a writer and as a filmmaker. So there's a lot of things in flux. It's a great time to be a content creator. That's one thing.
Yeah, there's no doubt. There's a lot more opportunity, but you got to put the work in, and that's something I always preach about to everybody in the business, that they got to work, and this is not going to be a 1-year thing. It's the 10-year plan, and you got to get ready for the long haul. Would you agree?
That's exactly right. That's what I tell my university students here at DePaul, who have interest in going out to Hollywood. We have a very, very successful program here and in the LA quarter, where they go out, and typically their spring quarter, the last year as an undergraduate, 90% of the people that come from our program are actually working in the business. This is after several years out there. Now, granted, some of them are in lower level, assistant type positions or PA type things, but many of them are now working as writers and segued into production executive positions and whatnot. But that's why I tell them, you've got to be able to think 7 to 10 years, and really, and part of that is not just about finding work. It's about growing up as a human being. You want to be a storyteller, you got to have stories to tell. And so, living life is a big part of it.
Absolutely. God, that's like gold to my ears. It's so good to hear somebody else saying stuff like this, because I preach it all the time. And you're right. You can't be a writer. You can't be a filmmaker unless you live. If not, your stuff becomes hacky and it's regurgitated stuff from what you've seen already, as opposed to trying to tell original stories of your experience on the planet.
Well, that's one thing that we pride ourselves here at DePaul, because we have a very diverse community of students and faculty and administration, we encourage our students to tell stories that come from their respective backgrounds. The world right now, perhaps never more than ever, needs stories about diverse people.
Amen.
Different cultures, different subcultures, to put a human face on the other, so that we move past this sort of demonization and fear base about who the other is, but just recognize our shared humanity. Mm-hmm. And so that's something we're very much in favor of and encourage here at DePaul.
Now, can you discuss a little bit about what the anatomy of a screenwriting deal in Hollywood looks like?
Well, it's changing.
Mm-hmm. Like as everything else.
It used to be you'd get a deal like I did with K9, where they'd acquire it, they'd have an acquisition price, then they'd give you a fee for first draft, and then you'd get a built-in second draft, a rewrite that was built into the contract. After the last Writers Guild strike, 2007, 2008, I think the studios had probably had this in mind before, but they used that to then do these single term deals. Mm-hmm. No guaranteed rewrite, which is a real problem, because what happens is this: if you're only going to get one shot at a project, right, to go forward with it, you get a call. Well, they like the draft, but if you could just make a couple of changes on it, then they bump it up, to the food chain, and so okay, so you go away, and now you're doing an unpaid, rewrite. Mm-hmm. You hand it back in. Hey, got just this one thing. If you can do this one thing, so now and your agents, are going to say pretty much the same thing to you. Well, it's your choice, but if you want to go in with your best foot forward, wink, wink, nod, nod. So that's been a problem. But the deal is structured. Look, you can make a goodly amount of money from project to project. A lot of these deals that you see trumpeted as a sale are actually options, mm-hmm. which can be for as little as $10,000 or $5,000 or even less. Mm-hmm. So that's not a lot of money. I'd say maybe the typical deal, it's hard to say, you get maybe $75,000 against $175,000. What that means is you're going to get $75,000 compensation for the script and your writing services, versus if it's $175,000, another $100,000 should the movie get made. That's reducible by if you share writing credit with someone else. But in the old days, like K9 sold for $750,000. Mm-hmm. And there are scripts that do sell for that much money, but it's just very rare. But so when you see somebody say, "Oh, it's a six-figure deal," you have to be very careful about that, because that six figures is almost assuredly talking about the back end stuff. It's like that, that $80,000 against $200,000. So they're saying it's a six-figure deal. They're saying that $200,000, but you're not guaranteed that money. You're only guaranteed the $80,000. You also get net profit participation, which translates into $0. There's like hardly any movie that ever gets to net, because the studios have various sets of accounting books, and then
Forrest Gump still hasn't made any money.
So, well, when they have gross profit, like Tom Hanks gets $1, gross.
Well, can you talk a little bit about the difference between net and gross for the audience?
Okay, well, gross is, and there's a bunch of different definitions of gross, and this is a little bit beyond my purview. I just know this, from as a screenwriter, I'm not a accountant or anything. Mm-hmm. There's these various definitions of gross. $1, which is, I think, the one where basically every penny from the that's being spent, that whoever that talent is, they're going to get a percentage of that from $1. Then there's reduced gross and various definitions of gross. But basically, that's what you want. You want to get a gross profit participation deal if you can get it. There are writers who get that, I would imagine, like probably Sorkin gets it, and some of the other A-list writers who are very, very well established. But that's more along the lines of directors and top talent, top acting talent. Net is where they say, okay, if we get the net profit, then you're going to get your percentage, 2.5% or 5% or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But you never reach net, because the studios will assign all sorts of costs to the production. See, they'll create a production company for the production. Mm-hmm. Then they lend the money to the production to produce the thing, and they charge interest on that loan. that interest goes back to the studio, and it's also a cost to the production. See what I'm saying? So it's like really, really hard to get to net. I think perhaps My Big Fat Greek Wedding, a movie like that, which cost $5 million and grossed upward to $300 million, Nia Vardalos probably saw some net dollars on that, but very, very rare.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show. Yeah. So can you list off a few of the do's and the don'ts on the business side of screenwriting? Because I know that's a very mysterious thing, the business of screenwriting for screenwriters. Everyone's always talking about the craft, but the business side's not talked about that much.
Well, on my blog, I've got like 200 blog posts called The Business of Screenwriting. So you could go into thestory.com and read that. I've got a whole slew of things there. Well, first thing is learn the craft, and that's super important. You've got to my mantra, right? Watch movies, read scripts, write pages. It's possible to learn what you need to do just by doing that. And reading scripts is the one area that people tend to fall down on. It's incredibly important to read scripts, not just the classic scripts, but current scripts within the last 5 years that are, movie scripts and or blacklist scripts or nickel scripts, because you're learning the style, sensibilities, and just getting into the mindset of what people are responding to in Hollywood. But you need to learn your craft. You need to find your voice. You need to have an approach to story prep and how you get through so that you're confident enough to know that when you sign that contract, for $200,000 to write this project, you're going, yay, and you turn the page and it says script due in 10 weeks. And, your sphincter doesn't go up through your mouth. You've got to have the confidence to be able to do that. And so learning the craft is critical. But there's some basic don'ts. Don't be an asshole. That's
a big one.
People in Hollywood like to work with the people they like to work with. It sounds kind of silly, but it's absolutely true. If it comes down to writer A or writer B, and writer B is an asshole and writer A is not, and they're both equal talents, then they'll probably go with writer A. Everybody you meet is a potential networking opportunity. And I don't like the word networking so much, but it really is true. You've got to develop a network. Don't expect your agents and managers to land you, gigs. A lot of times you'll land them just through the relationships you develop with production executives. So nurture those, follow up with an email or a call and say, hey, I really enjoyed meeting you. I thought that was great. And drop in, every so often, like 2-3 months, and say, hey, what's going on? Nurture those relationships. Be kind to assistants.
Huge.
They are human beings just like you. Don't overlook them when you're excited to go see that manager, that agent, that studio executive. The assistants are human beings. Moreover, they go up the food chain, and the person who is an assistant today will be a studio executive and could hire you tomorrow. But, just as a human being, be kind to them because they have very, very difficult jobs, and, they are worthy of respect. Do some research, track down who is who in the studio at the executive level with production companies. Know a certain amount about the business. You don't have to let it dictate what you write, but to know and track via the trades, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, Deadline, The Wrap, and stay in conversation with other writers about what's going on. That can be helpful. You have to determine what kind of writer you are. There are some writers who are very successful at chasing the market. There's a lot of writers who say don't do that, but there are some writers who are like, they're action writers or they're thriller writers or they're science fiction writers, and they know what's out there. They know what's being developed. They try and forecast what will be the next thing that will sell. So they're very, very specifically trying to write to a genre space. There are other writers who are exactly the opposite. They just follow their creative instincts. And some writers can do both, but you need to think about what writer you want to be. Here's another tip, which is find a genre space that you love and are good at. Not to say you can't write across genres, but if you write 3 scripts in one genre and have two treatments in that same genre, and you do what I told you to do earlier about reaching out to a manager,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know a manager alive who would look at your material given that, particularly if you have a good log line for that first project you sent to them. Because if you're in a genre, like this is your thing, I'm an action writer, I'm a thriller writer, I'm a comedy writer, then that's how they put you up for writing assignments. That's how they market you. They brand you, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to be I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, they have to put you in the box. They have. It's easy. It's an easier sell as opposed to someone who's like, he's a comedy writer, but he also does drama, but hits his one action script and he does sci-fi. But you're right. If you can be a specialist, that's what they're looking for.
You get put on lists.
Mm-hmm.
I got put on lists. I got put on animal lists along with comedy. I wrote a movie after I wrote the dog movie. I wrote a movie about called. It was about a pig and a witness relocation program.
Genius.
Called Hamlet. And then there was another one about frogs. There was another one about frogs. So I joked that I wrote movies about dogs, frogs, and hogs. I mean, they put you they assign these things to you, and if you're willing to do that,
right,
then that's your brand, and so you can do that for like 7 years and make some good money. That person is a comedy guy, or that woman is great with with drama or whatnot. Now, you can always write a spec and bust out of that. And it's not to say you can't write across genres. I know, like Brian Duffield is very, very successful, and he writes just all sorts of different things.
Sure.
But generally speaking, when I talk to managers, they prefer to have clients who settle on one genre. So those are some words of advice. I hope you find that helpful.
Now, why hasn't Hamlet been made?
Oh, that was easy. We were set. That was Don Steele, and we had a director attached, and we were going. We were in pre-production.
Uh-huh.
And then Babe came out and just completely blew up.
Right.
It was like nobody anticipated that movie. And then the studio just got cold feet. You think, well, similar but different, but I guess in that case,
it was too different. It was too similar or too different.
Yeah, too similar.
Because that sounds genius. I would have loved to watch that. That and K9 as a double feature, I think, would be good.
Pig and Witness Real. I mean, that's so classic, late '80s, early '90s, right?
Very much so. Yeah, I don't know if that story flies today, but back then, oh my god, it would have been brilliant. Now, what should screenwriters deal? How should screenwriters deal with getting rewritten, which happens almost all the time, and it's a big deal.
Almost all, yeah. I have a Business of Screenwriting post that I did where we went up for my writing partner and I went for a writing assignment to rewrite a script that had been written by Ron Bass.
Oh, geez. Okay. Ron Bass.
He's one of the most successful screenwriters in the history of Hollywood.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
And so I turned to my partner and I said, well, look, if we're up to rewrite him, everybody gets rewritten. Everybody gets rewritten. There was that story of Moneyball where Steve Zalian had written a draft of it. And, that story is amazing how that movie got made, considering the Soderbergh's turning in a draft and it was different than what the studio expected. Mm-hmm. And Brad Pitt said, no, there's a movie here and I see it. And since Zalian wrote a draft. So I remember the story. He was in Rome with his family on vacation. His cell phone chirps and he answers and says, Steve, this is Aaron Sorkin. I just wanted to call you, let you know that I'm rewriting you on Moneyball. Well, they ended up actually working parallel, but together on that project, basically rewriting each other. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Moneyball came out and it was a successful movie. Everybody gets rewritten. Well, how to deal with it? Well, it hurts. You don't want to get rewritten. Right. If you're the person being rewritten, you don't mind a little off-color story, do you?
Mm-hmm. Off color is fine.
Okay. So, because we got rewritten on K9, and when they said they were going to bring somebody else in, of course they tell you this is how much confidence we have in the project. We're actually bringing in someone to rewrite you. It's like that's so Hollywood.
I can't even tell you how Hollywood.
It's actually a compliment to your talent that we're bringing in somebody to rewrite you. So anyhow, my agent, Marty Bauer, said, well, guys, you got effed, but you got effed with a golden dick. So, that's, that's kind of the mindset. That's why you have multiple projects going. Mm-hmm. You stack projects. That's what you can do as a writer. So you're writing this, you're rewriting another thing, you're developing another thing. So you give yourself 24 hours, go tie one on, get hammered, go talk to your friends, then wake up the next day and start on the next project.
Do you know the story of the Pretty Woman rewrite?
Well, it was a very dark drama.
It was. I was assuming you would, that the 6,000, it was called $6,000 or something like that. And the writer was super upset about him being rewritten. This is not my story.
Yeah.
And then of course, after it made, a gazillion dollars, he's like, yeah, that was mine. I did that.
And he ended up with sole credit. So
yeah. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
On the other side, if you are rewriting someone, it's become, I think writers have become more human nowadays about that. It's a good thing to contact the person you're rewriting. Mm-hmm. And Eric Heiser, I talked to him about this, and his way of approaching it is, look, they've handed me the keys to your car, and so I'm going to drive it for a while, but it's still your car, and I just wanted you to know. And then you haven't give them an opportunity to talk about, what their vision for it was, and just be a decent human being. Mm-hmm. That does take a certain amount of humanity, I guess.
Courage to
call up a writer and say, look, I'm rewriting you, and I just want to reach out to you. But I think that's a decent thing to do, mm-hmm. and if writers should be decent to each other. If other people aren't going to be decent to us, at least writers can be.
Right, because writers are historically one of the most beaten down professions in the business.
Ironically enough. And I think part of it is, frankly, beyond everything else, and they can get away with it, and that writers tend to be, can be cantankerous characters and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Part of it is, frankly, they can't do what we do.
Right.
And that bothers them.
Mm-hmm.
They can't create something out of nothing. They can't problem solve like we can. And so there's that's some of the psychological subtext going on there historically.
I've never heard it put that way before. That makes perfect sense, actually.
It's like that goes back to that line. I think Thalberg, Irving Thalberg, the first great Hollywood producer, was meeting with the writers, and he had a love-hate relationship with the writers. Mm-hmm. But he said, what is it with you writers? You think you're so special. It's just a matter of putting down words. and one of the writers looked at him and said, yeah, but to know which words.
Brilliant. Now, another question that I get asked a lot by screenwriters, what should be a page count be of a standard Hollywood script?
Well, I'm not a big one for these so-called screenwriting rules. In fact, on my blog, you can mm-hmm. see, I actually have 8 free ebooks now of blog stuff. I'm going to end up with 12 this year.
Nice.
Thanks to Clay Mitchell and Trish Curtin for helping me edit those things. But one of them is so-called screenwriting rules, mm-hmm. and one of them is about page count. Stories are organic, and there are conventions and expectations, but there's no real rules. Mm-hmm. Can you have an act that goes into like page 35? Yeah, you've got to make sure that it needs 35 pages, but generally speaking, you're looking at 20, 25. Okay, page count. I think that there's been some shrinkage, frankly, mm-hmm. Because people like things to move more quickly nowadays because of YouTube and whatever. So what used to be like a 120-page script, I'd say now maybe, we tend to see scripts 105, 110 pages. Mm-hmm. What used to be the end of Act 1 is now oftentimes the middle of Act 1, mm-hmm. So I would say, again, this is just a rule of thumb, and I hate to use that word. No, it just says a ballpark touchstone. Mm-hmm. You want to write a 100-page script, basically. There are certain readers that will think that a script maybe is undercooked if it comes in at 90 pages or not. Something around like that. Now, that's not always the case because you may work with a production company that's very specifically working on a low-budget movie, mm-hmm. in which case, 85 pages or 90 pages for a horror film or whatever, or comedy.
Perfect. That
could be fine. But if it's a studio thing, if it's science fiction, you got to do a lot of world building, so maybe it's a little longer. If it's an action movie with a lot of scene description and not much dialogue, maybe it's a little shorter. So, 100 pages is probably a good page count, mm-hmm. I like 105, but everybody's got their thing.
Got it. And then are screenwriting contests worth it?
Well, to the people whose careers have been benefited by them, they would probably say yes. I mean, there's a bunch of them out there. There's the Austin Film Festival. There's Tracking B. There's Tracking Board. There's
Nickel.
Well, the Nickel is legit. I mean, that's the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. I mean, that's been around for. I mean, that's like got major people involved. On that board, and there's just a track record of those people who win the Nickel going on and doing well.
Or even placing in the Nickel, it gets you attention.
They sent out email blasts. I think from quarterfinals up, maybe semifinals up. I don't know exactly. The top 10, absolutely. I know people who finished in the top 10. In fact, we had a DePaul student who finished in the top 10 and, got representation off that. And he's currently working as a screenwriter in Hollywood. So, you have to understand, bottom line, these contests are about them making money. You have to understand that. They don't do this because they're generous. They do this as a money-making operation. That's why they charge those fees. Okay? So just understand that. Do your due diligence. If you make sure you see, check the results. Have people actually translate it into getting gigs. Now you have to be careful. There's some really kind of hinky things out there. People will say, this deal, so and so who was a graduate of this, online educational outfit, or who is they'll say an alumnus of, what that meant is that they submitted their script to the competition, right? They didn't actually learn anything. Or this educational outfit, maybe they just gave them a bunch of PDFs and they did peer review of their kind of. But they'll say this deal that they signed. Well, what the deal is simply they just got representation. They get their manager. No, there was no money. There's no deal. Right. You don't even sign with a manager. There's no contracts with managers. So you have to be very careful about what they claim. Their success rate is. But, if you do due diligence, you'll read interviews with writers. A lot of them will talk about their experiences, having tried contests. And but if you really want to be safe, the Nickel is the safest one. I think probably the Austin Film Festival is, maybe not as much cachet as the Nickel. Well, it definitely doesn't have as much cachet. But then the other ones, just be buyer beware. They are out to make money, and some of them, I guess, are more successful than others. But the best thing you can do is just write the best script possible. And if you really want an honest, unfiltered thing, is to use the Blacklist website, because then that's the ultimate contest. You're actually having people who are in the business, reading your material based on your log line and some evaluations. And as a direct line to the buyer.
Great advice. Now, I wanted to go into your insane blog, Go Into the Story. I want you to talk a little bit about that blog and what an insane resource it is for screenwriters.
Well, I started it on May 16th, 2008, and I've blogged every day since. So it's like 3,300 consecutive days.
Jesus.
The inspiration for it was simply this. Back then, there weren't as many resources as there are now. And a lot of the stuff that was being trumpeted as, back then you'd see actually people saying, learn the secrets to writing $1 million spec script, from people who had never worked in Hollywood or had a movie made.
Shysters.
And that was upsetting. I had people in my online classes saying, I just feel completely ripped off, or they'd show me notes that they got from a script consultant, and the notes were just complete, BS. And so I felt like, well, I worked in the business. I've had movies made. I've written dozens of projects. I've done TV and film. I've taught. John August had a great, he's like the grandfather of all this stuff. He started his blog, I believe, in 2004, and it's an incredible resource. But what I didn't see was someone doing it every day, like someone who was following the news, someone who's tracking spec script deals, someone who's providing inspiration and information on a daily basis. And it just was an extension of what I do naturally as a writer, where I would just go through and look at the trades, follow the news, and I would read poems, and I read writing quotes for inspiration. And, that's how I started it. It's like a free resource, no advertisement. I've never had an advertisement on my blog. So they don't have to feel like they're being, uploaded or trying to be, I don't forget that phrase, but upsold or anything. And to have this resource, and then ultimately to build this mass of content so that people could go and just, look through it and find stuff on like every different subject. So there are now 23,000 posts on the blog. There's 6 posts a day. You can get a daily summary, so it comes in your email.
You do 6 posts a day?
Yeah, it's like, again, I type really fast. I think really fast. I've gotten used to doing that. I'm like the perfect blogger for this type of thing.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Like, for example, here's a great example of something that emerged out of the blog. In November 2015, I'd had a project I was writing, and something in the news happened that blew it up. Just completely blew it up. I could no longer write that project because of what happened in the news. And I'd had a comedy that I'd been sitting on for some time, and I got so frustrated, I said, well, NaNoWriMo was no longer doing the Script Frenzy, which they did up until 2013, which was a script version of NaNoWriMo, where you write a novel in a month. This would be writing a script in a month. So I just invited people via my blog to join me in November. I was going to write a zero draft. I said, I'm just going to write this thing from fade in to fade out. It's going to suck, but I'm just going to put the words down. And I normally don't do that. I normally work from an outline, but I just wanted to try it. Well, I had over 1,000 people respond to that. In fact, it created this thing called Zero Draft 30 Challenge, the Zero Draft 30 Challenge, which we now run twice a year. So starting on September 1st, which is tomorrow, we're going to be running the Zero Draft 30 2017 September Challenge. And every day on the blog, I'm going to post something there, along with my other posts, about the challenge, where people come and they talk about what they're writing. They'll provide some inspiration of quotes or videos or whatnot. There's a Facebook group, the Zero Draft 30 Facebook group, which has got 2,300 members, a terrific group of people, very supportive, positive-minded. We have a Twitter feed, hashtag ZD30Script. And so this is something that's emerged now that twice a year, the idea to get people writing, to write 2 spec scripts a year, which is what you should be doing. And so that's something that's emerged from the blog. The blog has created all sorts of initiatives and community outreach type of things. And it's been very successful. I have more traffic now than I've ever had, site traffic.
That's amazing. Oh, I mean, I've known about your site for a long time, and I before I ever opened up Indie Film Hustle, I used to visit it all the time, and you just have such a wealth of information. I don't know of another resource out there that has so much for free.
For free. It's all free. Yeah. Yeah, let me just one little anecdote about this. I had a friend who's a writer who said, "Scott, why are you doing this? This is insane. Why are you giving away all this content for free?" Right. Basically, almost every good thing that's happened to me professionally since has been because of that blog. Yep. I am now more well connected in Hollywood than I ever was when I lived 2 miles from 20th Century Fox. I know more managers, more agents, more producers, more talent, more writers than I ever did when I was out there.
And I would say the exact same thing has happened to me ever since I launched Indie Film Hustle. The amount of connections, relationships, being able to sit down and talk to you for an hour, without a blog, that's very difficult to reach out to people of your caliber. And just as the relationships you've built over the time, it is everything that's happened to me since I opened up Indie Film Hustle has been generally directly because of the blog. So I understand 110%.
Yeah, your site is one of those sites that provides quality content, and those resources are great. I think film school's not for everybody. I think at a school like DePaul, where they can literally go out and they're making movies in their freshman year because we've got 3 sound stages at CineSpace where they shoot all the Chicago Fire, Chicago Med, and all that stuff. They've got incredible gear, but film school's not for everybody. So you can put it together, a version of it, by using places like Go Into the Story or Your Site and other sites. There's just a ton of free quality content. Just make sure you vet things and are looking for the quality sites out there.
Now, I'm going to ask you the last few questions, which I ask all of my guests. So be prepared for your Oprah questions. I call these the Oprah questions.
Okay.
What advice would you give a screenwriter wanting to sell their first screenplay?
Well, if it's only their first screenplay, they've written their first screenplay, I would say write 2 more. Don't try and sell your first screenplay. I can almost guarantee you that after you've written 3 screenplays, you'll look at your first screenplay and go, wow, I thought I'd written a great script, but it's got some issues. So, and moreover, again, are you going to, when you're signing that contract in the lawyer's office and it says this script is due in 10 weeks, I tell this to my university students, and you can just see them tense up. I say, you've got to have a confidence that you can do this. Now, maybe after one script, like Diablo Cody, did with Juno, but she'd been a blogger for years, and she'd written, a memoir. She was a writer. She's a born writer. And maybe some people can do it with one script, but my advice would be write 2 more scripts.
The best advice I've ever heard about screenwriting was given to me by Jim Uhls. Do you know Jim?
Yeah.
Jim said, when you sit down, write a screenplay. When you're done with that screenplay, write it straight. Don't edit it. Don't do anything. Just write it straight. When you're done, put it in your in a drawer. Start another screenplay. Do the exact same process. Put it in the drawer. Do it a third time. Put it in the drawer. Now take that first script out and start rewriting it, because now you're a better writer.
That's great advice.
Isn't that amazing? I thought that was just brilliant.
And he had the number 3 like me too. So
now, can you tell me what book had the biggest impact on your life or your career?
Oh, that's pretty easy. It's The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell.
Oh, what a great book.
It's an academic book. I was shocked when I came to Hollywood and I saw it on the bookshelves of studio executives and producers. Like, what is this academic book doing here? And of course, then I found out about George Lucas and Star Wars. But because of Chris Vogler's book, The Writer's Journey, which is an excellent book, and that has, the hero's journey. He reduced these 17 aspects of narrative that Campbell talked about in The Hero with 1,000 Faces to 12 to make it more amenable for screenwriting. It's become a thing. And it makes me kind of sad in a way, because I've heard producers say this. In fact, I blogged about it because somebody did this on a message board. A manager said, I hate the hero's journey. Why? Well, because it's all just this formulaic crap. Well, that's not what Joseph Campbell intended at all. And I'm sure that's not what Chris Vogler intended. It's what's happened. People tend to reduce this thing, trying to find some sort of paradigm,
magic
or
bullet.
pattern, magic bullet,
Right.
That's not what Campbell had in mind at all. So I tend to approach the hero's journey from more of a meta view. The 3 stages, separation, initiation, return. The idea of transformation, that the whole point of the hero's journey is transformation, and that the message of the hero's journey is follow your bliss. And so it works for me on 2 levels, as a writer and storyteller, and as a human being, because there is no more important message for a creative person than follow your bliss. I don't think.
God,
it's the first thing I tell my students every quarter, and it's the last thing I tell them as we end every quarter. If you get nothing else from having worked with me in class, live with this idea. It's a scary way to live. It has ups and downs, but it is the most authentic way to live. If you are aligned with what turns you on creatively, and you choose to pursue that with passion, and you have talent, and you have a voice, and you think that you've got something you can say of worth to the greater society and the world at large, then you are set on a path that's going to bring you great satisfaction. Yes, ups and downs. Yes, trials and tribulations. You're on your own hero's journey that way. But at least you have aligned yourself with something that is yours. Campbell had a saying, a paraphrase. He said, there's nothing sadder than for someone to spend their lives climbing the ladder to success only to discover they've been on the wrong wall.
Oh, wow. What an amazing quote.
And that's the antithesis of follow your bliss. That's someone did not follow it. They followed somebody else's, not their own.
Whether it be their parents or what society told them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Find out what you want to do. Find out what your rapture is, your bliss.
He was, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but he was more of a philosopher as well as an academic.
And a spiritualist.
Yes. Yes.
He created his own, he taught at Sarah Lawrence University for 43 years, Sarah Lawrence College, I guess it was.
Yeah.
I have a picture of the doorknob for his door from Sarah Lawrence College on my desk. It's there on my desk. I had someone who went to school there and found the door to his office that he had for a few years and took a picture of it.
That's amazing.
But yeah, he created it. He didn't get a PhD. There was no PhD in what he did. He just read.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
People asked him, do you pray? He said, no, I read. He read 10 hours a day. He read stories from all around the world, and he noticed these similar dynamics. Separation, initiation, return. The hero gets transformed.
That's,
he saw it over and over again. So
now,
that book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, that's the most inspirational book for me.
Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
That's a good question. I guess I'm still learning it. For a long time, I looked at my life and I thought, I've never failed. I never even got, like, all the colleges and graduate schools I applied to. I never got rejected by any of them. And so for the longest time, I was just living this life, and then, selling a spec script for, a lot of money and all this, right? Everything I did, music, comedy, academics, screenwriting, successful. You learn the most about yourself, I think, in life in general when you fail.
Yes.
And that has been a lesson, that I think it has been something that I've had to learn. And you have to have that understanding to work in Hollywood, because you will. You are absolutely going to fail, and you're going to fail multiple times. And so you've got to be able to live with that and learn from that. So that's probably the most important lesson that I've struggled to come to grips with. It's not fun, obviously, failing. And it's hard to determine from time to time, like, what lessons you can learn from it. But the one thing is universal. You just get up and you go back at it. Persistence. That's, writer, absolutely. If you fail, just get back up and go on to the next story. Now, what are 3 of your favorite films of all time? Oh, that's easy. The Apartment is absolutely my favorite movie of all time. Brilliant. Billy Wilder is my favorite. Billy Wilder and Izzy Diamond, those are my favorite. Billy Wilder's my favorite filmmaker. But I also love the Coen brothers, and I also love Pixar. I'm a huge. Those 3 are. And well, Kubrick, I guess, too. But
yeah, of course. I could talk for hours on Kubrick.
I'd be tempted to put Up in there because I thought Up was just brilliant. I'd be tempted to put. There's a handful of Coen Brothers movies. Any of them, they're great. Inside Llewyn Davis is an incredible movie, but I'll go with a couple more traditional ones. Dr. Strangelove, which is just the greatest satire ever created, I think. And then I've got to include maybe more of Silence of the Lambs. The Silence of the Lambs is like the perfect, for what I teach, it's like the perfect movie. I mean, it really is. And it's one of 3 movies to win all 5 of the major Academy Awards. I know. It was insane. And it's a horror movie. Yeah. So, and that was it wasn't the first to win. I think, did Exorcist win anything? No, it was 3rd. The Exorcist. I think it might have won something. Yeah. But, it was, I think that back then in 1991, it qualified as a horror movie. I don't know if it would necessarily. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Oh, but it was the 3rd film ever to win all 5. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Actor, Best Screenplay. Wow. It was an amazing film. Amazing film. Now, where can people find you, sir? Well, if they're in Chicago, I'm at
No, not your personal home address. Online.
I can tell you a bar that I hang out at over in my neighborhood, Nick Park. No, they can find me at gointothestory.com. That's, it's actually gointothestory.blacklist or BLCK LST.lst.com, but just go into the story, which is my blog. And then the Screenwriting Masterclass, which is my online educational resource that I teach online. I've been doing it for years. Had great success with my students. Many of them have gone on to do very, very well with themselves. So there's that. There's the Zero Draft 30 Facebook group, which I host. But basically that just is, those people there are just great, and they constantly doing stuff. So those are three ways you can reach me.
Scott, thank you so much, man, for taking the time out. It's been a lengthy conversation, but I could ask you another 100 questions, but I know you're a busy man. You've got 15 blog posts to put out today.
Yeah. Actually, I do have another call right now, so it's a good time to end. So.
Scott, thank you again so much, my friend.
Okay, great talking with you, and good luck with your blogging.
And Scott really did drop some great knowledge bombs on you guys. I really hope you got a lot out of that episode. I know I did. And I want to thank Scott again for doing the show and really just sharing so much great information with the tribe. So thank you, Scott, once again. Now, if you want to get links to anything we talked about in the show, just head over to the show notes at indiefilmhustle.com/185. You'll get all of Scott's contact information there. And guys, don't forget to head over to filmmakingpodcast.com and leave us a good review, please. It really helps us out a lot with the rankings in iTunes and getting more and more people to hear us. So if you have not left a review for the show, please go leave a review for the show. I really, really appreciate it. And guys, with the continued series that I'm doing of gathering some of the best screenwriters, scripts, and collections of their scripts for you guys to download and learn from, this week's is the Coen brothers. And if you want to just go to the show notes at indiefilmhustle.com/185, I'll have links to it there, or you could just go to indiefilmhustle.com and download all of their amazing screenplays. I just read The Big Lebowski again the other day, and my God, it's just so brilliant. But anyway, I got a bunch of new collections that I'm working on and just trying to curate screenplays from all of these amazing screenwriters for all of us to learn and essentially just make better films. So, as always, keep that hustle going, keep that dream alive, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.